as China now, GDP is also getting larger, but also it seems that maybe with a number of years, China may surpass US on the GDP status, but maybe per capita still far behind. But what do you think about this? How can we really now accept each other, maybe coexist with each other peacefully? We cannot. I remember probably you said before that the U.S. has a system that fits U.S. China has a system that fits China. We should not really try to change each other or something. Can we really reach that kind of a common understanding, or maybe how we can do that?
And it seems to me that for civilized nations around the world that are concerned for the rights of these women and these children that may be thrown back into the dark ages or the stone ages through this change of leadership, that civilized nations would be motivated to work together to keep a presence there to maintain the stability. The American people are kind of tired of being the sole, what's perceived to be the sole protector. There were allies there, but not in great forces. But the American people elected Biden with his promise to withdraw. President Trump made the commitment to withdraw. A better strategy would have been to say, let's get countries from all over the world, people that have a notion of what it is to be civilized, and find our common humanity and work together. That may be idealistic and naive, but I do believe we're going to get there. The world is becoming so connected, so close. So, there's everything is far more transparent than it has been in the past. And so where there's a wrong that needs to be righted, we need to work together to right that wrong. And of course, I'm on the edge of very controversial issues here, specifically related to the treatment of minorities in Xinjiang, for example. I just hope the Chinese are very, very transparent about what's going on there, and that the truth be known so that the world can settle down. And and in the meantime, I'm all in favor of America expressing our values, that where there are human rights challenges, let's bring people from all over the world to put pressure on it to address those human rights related issues. And that relates to Afghanistan and other places in the world today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's exactly, I think the more communication and as I said, the visit of each other is so crucial. As a matter of fact, Xinjiang now is really welcoming foreigners to visit. So because of the COVID, we really hope that more people come to Xinjiang and visit that. And that probably will clear things up, as you said. So David, what's your take on the question about how we can really, can we really coexist peacefully together, and maybe gradually accept each other's differences? Because, for example, this COVID-19, China has been managing now with China basically putting a lot of community interest on individual interest, whereas U.S. is really emphasize human rights and cannot violate, and that the whole society actually has less freedom, whereas China probably individually you suffer a bit, but the whole society gained a lot of freedom and right on that. So what's your ideas on that?
We are never going to see eye to eye on those issues. We're never probably going to see eye to eye on the issue of Taiwan, for example. China has its view, the United States has its view. The views are essentially irreconcilable. We're not going to see the issue of the South China Sea the same way. China has its long-held view. The United States and many other countries have a very different view. We're not going to get to a point where we have a meeting, come away from it and say, hey, now we agree on it. So there are some irreconcilable, and by the way, same for Hong Kong, same for the issue of human rights and a number of other issues. So the point is, given that there are differences that will always be part of the fabric of the relationship between our two countries, how do we manage the relationship in light of that? And I think the view that Neil and that I and that the Bush-China Foundation and other moderates in the United States, the few of them that seem to be out there at this time, is it can be done. We can have a business-like and a functional, constructive, results-oriented, mutually beneficial and politically sustainable relationship, even with those differences being unreconciled. And we ought to aspire to do that. And rather than say, look, because we disagree on all these different profound issues, let's take our ball and go home. We advocate the opposite. We advocate, Neil advocates, I advocate, the Bush-China Foundation, for the idea that this is all the more reason that we need to come together with a problem-solving mindset. So that's what I would say. I think it can be done. It just requires the vision, and we're going to continue to stand strong for that sensible, common sense, moderate perspective on how to move this relationship forward.
I think that you're right. We should probably really maximize the commonalities, the common ground, and minimize the differences. Of course, as you said, because of the culture, historical, and geographically, all those big differences. There are some differences probably will remain for a long time to come. But definitely, we have such a huge interest, a common interest, not only for the both countries but for the world, that we should really work together so that we can really avoid a catastrophe or maybe a hot war. I mean, these days we had a lot of populism and nationalism on the rising on both sides, and that is really dangerous. I think we, as you said, moderate but maybe cool heads and realistic. I think we need more people like that in both places. So absolutely important. In which area that can China and US cooperate among the pandemic area? I think we already probably covered some of that. Regarding the investigation of origin of virus, some argue that there's more politics into that rather than the scientists into that. And so what do you thought on that? How we can get out of that? And how should China and US cooperate on fighting against a pandemic?
I'll start on the last question you raised about the origins of the virus. I'm not as concerned, for example, about the origin of climate change, whether humans cause climate change or whether it's a natural occurrence or whether it's some combination. The fact is there's climate change and we need to address it. And there's clearly a role for the US and China and all the nations of the world to lock arms in addressing it. China's got its 2060, carbon neutrality pledge. The governments at all levels, the private sector will be unified in their effort to do that. And I have no doubt that China will be major players in the collaboration to try to address climate change. I mean, the same thing kind of rings true to me with the virus. Who cares where it originated? Whether it originated in a lab or from a bat or from the United States or from wherever it originated, who cares? The fact is we have a pandemic that continues to affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of people all across the globe. And there's a pressing need for mature, civilized nations in the world to work together. And so David may have more specific ideas on how we can work together, but it seems like collaboration is very natural when it comes to something as big as this and the origins of it. And I will put a little caveat that, I reject the idea that there was some malicious effort to release a virus, a virus that causes a pandemic. I think that's a crazy notion that there was some intent from one side or the other, to do this on purpose. So you throw away the crazy conspiracy theories and just assume that there was an origin of some kind. Doesn't matter where it originated. Let's deal with it together.
There are areas, I think, within the context of COVID-19 and pandemics more generally that we ought to work on together. Let me make one point at the outset, which is COVID-19 is not going to be the last pandemic that we as a world ever face. I mean, we know that. There will periodically be pandemics. They'll originate here, they'll originate there, meaning this country, country A, country B. And we will have to cope as a global community with pandemics forever, periodically. And so learning how to work together and to actually solve medical and public health and epidemiological problems is a good thing for our countries to be able to do. I think now, just as Neil said, is how do we actually work together to solve problems for real people? And I think we can do that in the areas of research and development, vaccine, comparing notes on what's working, what's not working, bringing medical practitioners and public policy experts together around the issue of the Delta variant, specifically helping each other, as we did in the early stages in both directions, with providing materiel, personal protective equipment. That was a good thing to do. I'm glad that we as a foundation were a part of that, along with many others in both directions. So there are a lot of things that I think we can do, but fundamentally focusing on solving a public health challenge rather than politicizing a medical issue and a public health issue is what we need to be focused on.
Great. Thank you, Neil and David, both for voicing such a very clear message. I think that is really very stimulating for people in both countries and probably to the world as well. I think you're absolutely right. We really need to concentrate on working together in solving the pandemic problem and the challenges and preventing the future pandemics. As you said, we may not be just this time, they could come again, and we really have to work together as a human race rather than as a country. So probably we should have a summit of some kind, or maybe WHO should convene the big countries together to really work out some recommendations for how to work together.
Well, thank you, Henry. I think I'll start by reiterating that my father often said, publicly, openly said, that the bilateral relationship between the United States and China was the most important bilateral relationship in the world. And it was prescient of him to say that many years ago, because it's becoming more true now than ever, given the gravity of the issues that we face, as humans on Earth. I would further say that globalization has been given the United States economy, our GDP and our individual wealth, a huge shot in the arm. Our biggest partner in the world of globalization has been China. So the United States has been a beneficiary of trade, as imperfect as it is, as David pointed out, with all of its warts. This trade relationship has benefited our country tremendously. And there's no doubt that China has been an enormous beneficiary of our trade relationship as well. And as we've had more and more cultural exchanges and student exchanges, there have been millions of Chinese visitors to the United States. They all happily go home to China. There's, it's not like there's something restraining them from getting back into their home or their desire to go home. But the reality is that we've benefited tremendously from this bilateral relationship. And so the past, to me, is what we should look to kind of predicting the future. The future is going to be even better. And we've come into this kind of crazy time where China's rise is all of a sudden being recognized by politicians as a threat to the United States. And once we can get over the hurdle that China doesn't represent a threat of to our national security or to our economy or to our freedoms or to our basic way of life, then and through dialogue we'll establish better understanding and more cooperation. So I pledge to continue to work with David and our team at the Bush China Foundation to do whatever I can to help speak truth and shed light on this very, very important relationship in a way that hopefully will allow for greater collaborations across the board, not only on all these major issues, but on basic things that are taking place day to day. Our governments at all different levels should be having meetings to share and to better understand, to put ourselves in the other guy's shoes, and to create a better, more peaceful and harmonious world as a result.
And as we've said in this conversation, that the U.S.-China relationship is the single most consequential bilateral relationship in the world. It matters to America, and of course it matters to China as well, and we've got to get it right. And we have to think in terms of the long term, because the turbulence that we're seeing today will not always be with us. Yes, there will always be disagreements and differences in perspective on some pretty important issues, but the tonality shifts from time to time. The way that we think of different countries can shift based on what's happening in the world. And we're looking at the long-term interests of the United States. That's the angle that we're coming at this relationship from.